Osborne, who is the next speaker. Mike Osborne lives and works in Washington, D.C. right now. He's an assistant professor of art at Georgetown University. He did his MFA work at the University of Texas, Austin in art, but he did his BA work at Stanford in English. And you and I were just talking about how there seems to be a lot of people sort of crossing, you know, a lot of contemporary photographers sort of have a background in something else before they come to photography. Mike is in a number of public collections with his work. We're thrilled to have him a very beautiful series of pictures in the Looking at the New West show of his right here. But he's recently had a few solo and two-person shows of his Floating Island, which I think we're going to see here today. Exhibitions of the Floating Island body of work. He was recently in, I'm sorry Mike, I'm kind of getting lost on your resume here, but Contemporary Photographic Practices in the Archives at the University of Texas Harry Ransom Center. And I think maybe that's it enough. Yeah. We'll just sort of turn it over to you. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks so much. So, as Bill mentioned, I'm going to be talking today about a project of mine called Floating Island, which is a recently completed body of work. Before I get started, I just wanted to extend thanks to Bill, especially for including me in the show and also the catalog. It's really a great honor. I've admired the work of a lot of the other photographers included in the show for a long time, so that the opportunity to show in that context is really just a really great honor. And then, of course, I'd also like to extend my thanks for including me in the symposium as well. I should also just very, very briefly acknowledge the Center for Land Use Interpretation and ArtPace San Antonio, two organizations that were instrumental in the production of the work that you're about to see. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So if any of you have had a chance to see the exhibition over at the Fralin, you'll have seen this image along with three others from the same series of pictures. This image is called Vertelis Valley. I received an email about a month or two after the show opened at the Fralin from one of the docents, and she asked a series of really great questions, basically just wanting to know what she was looking at so that she could communicate in turn to the people who walked into the space some information about what they're looking at in the photographs. Because the photographs, all photographs are incredibly mute. They don't tell you anything. They lack that capacity in a way. And so, you know, I tried to answer her questions as best I could, although even myself, after having been to this place and after having done a fair amount of research, I'm not entirely sure what we're looking at. I think we're looking at the remains of a process for producing aluminum, whereby something called salt cake is processed, I think, by being exposed to high temperatures, allowing aluminum to be extracted from the earth. In any case, the photograph's name is Vertelis, which is a reference to the company that owns the particular site where the photographs were made. Now, the name Vertelis was particularly compelling to me for a couple of reasons, and that's why I appropriated it as the title of my photographs. On the one hand, Vertelis sounds to me very much like the name of a fictional planet. And you'll see as we go through the work that there's a kind of sort of astronomical kind of quality, both to this image but also to the body of work as a whole, kind of referencing the way in which NASA photographs and images from science fiction films have worked their way into our collective consciousness. The other reason, of course, is that the name Vertelis, with that V-E-R-T at the beginning, sounds very much like it should have something to do with trees or plants or greenery, vert being green in French and verde being green in Spanish. And I like that contradiction, of course, that that the images, which are, I should back up and say that Bill mentioned earlier that the photographs in the show are all black and white photographs or achromatic photographs. My photographs are actually color photographs of a landscape that is inherently achromatic. So it's not the process that's achromatic, it's the landscape that's achromatic. And so I like that contradiction between this name, Vertellus, with its implications of greenery, and the site itself, which is inherently achromatic. So the photograph itself belongs to a larger body of work. It deals with the landscape that's represented in this map here. This is a 1972 U.S. Geological Survey map that I borrowed, and this is actually the cover of the book that will be coming out next year presenting this work. The history of the site is in some way represented by the leap between these two maps. So this is a 2011 USGS map of roughly the same location. And so looking at this map, we can see we're looking at the town of Wendover, Utah. And the vertical line that bisects the image is the line separating two counties, but also separating Utah and Nevada. So Utah is on the right, Nevada is on the left. And the giant X that you see there at the bottom is the Wendover Airfield, which was established in 1940 as a secret location for aviation training exercises. And the pilots is most famous as a site where the pilots of the atomic bomb missions were trained and tested this thing called the Norden bomb site that would allow them ultimately to drop the bombs with some degree of precision. The site was abandoned by the military following World War II, though the area around there continues to be used for weapons training exercises and so forth. As you can see in this later map, the airstrip, of course, still exists, and the town of Wendover to some degree exists, although you can't particularly tell from this map that a lot of the military infrastructure on the site has fallen into disrepair or been removed. And then to the left of the state line, where there was previously nothing, there's now kind of small suburban development, a golf course, and a series of casinos, which now form the economic backbone of the town. So that sort of historical trajectory is really, it's not something that the project necessarily deals with in a really explicit manner, but it's a kind of subtext on which the photographs are based. So the book itself is arranged as a series of 10 chapters. And just in the interest of time and so forth, I'm going to give you a very kind of elliptical overview of the whole project, showing you a couple of images from each chapter. So the book begins with a chapter called Floating Island. And I apologize, the images are a bit washed out here. But the photographs describe passing through a whiteout that occurred sort of on the fringe of that map that we were looking at, near the bottom of salt flats. And the photographs describe this trip to see this landmass, floating island, which is in a way kind of, well, in some way it's a central image for the project because it describes a photograph of an illusion. It's a subtle illusion, but this is a photograph of an inferior mirage, which creates the sensation that the land is floating slightly above the horizon. And that notion of a landscape that has an illusion built into it is a kind of central idea in the project as a whole. The next chapter is simply called Wendover and gives kind of the most concrete description of the towns and its relationship to the landscape surrounding it. So this photograph is made in Nevada, looking east into Utah. So you see in the foreground a series of casinos and so forth, and then towards the pointer, but in the upper third picture here, you actually see the site where that Vertellus photograph was made. And then beyond that, you see a series of evaporation ponds which is where the material that's processed in the Vertellus photographs is derived from, and then beyond that, you see the Great Salt Lake Desert and Bonneville salt flats and so forth. So the photograph in a way is functioning as a map. This is a person going to work. The town population of about 6,000 people, and about half of the population is employed in casinos. And then again, there's a somewhat of a mapping function to the image. Behind, so behind the guy you have the train, which runs through. The train is sort of central to the founding of the town in the first place. Behind that, mobile home community. Behind that, it's hard to read in this blown out slide, but a landing strip, and beyond that, you can see in the upper right corner a series of munitions bunkers that are still there as reminders of the base during World War II. Subsequent chapter, Montego Bay, literally sort of circles this one particular casino, the largest casino in the town, offering sort of in the round kind of perspective on this one building. Of course, as in the case of the Vertellus image, I'm also interested in the language and the naming of these places. So the disjunction between Montego Bay, which is a resort community in Jamaica, and this desert community, I'm interested in that disjunction. The next chapter leaps into that zone called South Base, which is the former munitions storage site that I mentioned earlier. These are now used for storing, people in the town store their personal belongings in these. They rent them from the county, which now owns the property. But of course, they still have that extremely sort of eerie presence in the landscape. It's something that is accentuated by photographing at night when there's no moon. And so the sole source of illumination in these pictures is the town and principally the casinos, because the casinos make such extensive use of light. And so the photographs are entirely lit by these casinos, which are about 3 miles away. I should also mention that the photographs are, to some extent, borrowing a photographic language from movies. Think of these as being related to the kinds of representations that you see in films like the recent sci-fi film Moon, or in any number of other science fiction films. And the site itself, that's both a kind of conscious decision to make the world depicted in each of these chapters feel different and feel like its own kind of discrete world, but it's also kind of in reference to the way in which the landscape itself, again, has a kind of tendency towards illusion built into it. And so that this landscape is often used for everything from car commercials to films about the apocalypse, films about the afterlife, and so forth. And so it's a way of also kind of describing the way in which the landscape has been used to those ends. The tower in the photograph there is actually not a historical tower. It's a leftover from the film Con Air, which was shot on this particular site. The next chapter describes the UTTR, which they call the UTR. It's the Utah Test and Training Range, and it is a still active military bombing site, which I was able to enter in the company of some corporate contractors whose job it is to find and detonate unexploded ordnance. So these guys walk around the landscape with metal detectors looking for bombs, which they then detonate with other bombs. And so this photograph here is an image of one of these bombs from 50s or 60s that's been sitting there sort of slowly decaying in the salt. being detonated a mile away, watching this happen. As I mentioned, I'm interested in each of the chapters being its own sort of discrete world. In some way, the structure of this project is very, very loosely modeled on something like Stanley Kubrick's 2001, where you have these drastic leaps from a prehistoric landscape, a pre-technological realm, to through the famous jump cut to the interior of a spaceship and so forth. And each of the chapters not necessarily linking explicitly to the other sections of the film, and maybe that has something to do with what Bill mentioned before about my interdisciplinary background, that I'm interested not only in the photographs, but how the photographs are sequenced and what that experience of traveling through these different worlds does to the viewer. So there's a chapter that describes the interior of some of these casinos, which kind of relating to this idea of illusions built into the landscape. These casinos, of course, completely turn their back on the exterior. They're sort of, the exterior in this landscape is the ultimate exterior, limitless expanse. The interiors are extremely claustrophobic and closed off towards the exterior. And yet they have this kind of cosmic theme, which is sort of present in some of the photographs like Rotunda's images. A later chapter in the book describes the Bonneville Salt Flats, a site that many of you are probably familiar with as a location where people have been going now for nearly 100 years, or maybe even over 100 years, to set land speed records. And in photographing that site and some of those events, I've essentially photographed it in a way that it's impossible to tell what the people are actually doing. I'm appropriating the site and sort of deliberately decontextualizing the people. Again, sort of situating them in a narrative arc where they read perhaps more as participants or as protagonists in a kind of science fiction film, as opposed to reading as people who are driving race cars extremely fast. Brings us up to the Rotunda chapter. Again, I would just add to what I said earlier about these photographs by mentioning the doubleness of these photographs. So just in the same sense that the photograph that we were just looking at is both the photograph of the guy about to race a car, but he's also sort of transformed into this kind of astronaut-type figure. In the case of the Rotunda photographs, I'm both extremely interested in what the photograph is of, but I'm also interested in its capacity to evoke a kind of much more sort of cosmological kind of perspective. The photographs are made by bringing movie lights onto the landscape, powered by generators. And so they're extremely deliberately stylized in this particular way, the landscape. You saw it in the first photograph that I showed you of the image that was kind of a map of the town. Clearly, if I photographed the site during the day, the experience of the picture would be completely different. So these are extremely self-consciously authored images. The next chapter of the book is called Rest Area. It describes a rest area on the edge of Interstate 80, where people frequently turn off to go see one of the more stark examples of the salt flats. This was the setting for the afterlife in Terrence Malick's recent film, Tree of Life, which came out right after we finished this project. And the concluding chapter is called Nugget T748. Again, I'm interested in this language of the place. All of the chapters are titled after some concrete feature of this landscape. So Nugget P748 is a room in the Nugget Casino Hotel. A sequence of photographs, but this is the final image in the book. Not a digital montage, it's a photograph that describes both the interior and the exterior. So throughout the project, there's been this kind of oscillation between the extreme interior of the casino and the extreme exterior. And so this last photograph unifies those two things and offers you both of them simultaneously. I haven't said a whole lot about the theme of environmental action explicitly. So in the interest of doing so, I thought I would just close with a short quote from a John McPhee book that discusses this particular landscape. It's published, I think, in 1980. It's called Basin and Range. And it's a really beautiful book. It's both extremely informative about the landscape, but also written in an extremely lyrical kind of voice. There's a passage in the book where this maybe relates to Linus's talk earlier. This is that last image that he closed with. McPhee is talking about David Brower, the founder of the Sierra Club. And in quoting Brower, Brower is talking about human and geological history and kind of relationships of those time scales, which is something that I'm extremely interested in this project, because the landscape has such, you can't go out there and not be thinking about geological time. So McPhee, quoting Brower, says, "At 3 minutes before midnight, man appeared. At 1/4 of a second before midnight, Christ arrived. At 1/40th of a second before midnight, the Industrial Revolution began. We are surrounded with people who think that what we have been doing for that 1/40th of a second can go on indefinitely. They are considered normal, but they are stark raving mad." Brower holds up a photograph of the world, blue, green, and swirling white. "This is the sudden insight of Apollo," he says. "There it is, that's all. We see through the eyes of the astronauts how fragile our life really is." Thank you very much.